Welcome to Saturday Night at the Movies. I'm your host, Glenn Holland. Tonight's movie is the 1936 screwball comedy My Man Godfrey, directed by Gregory LaCava. The screenplay by Maury Riskind and Eric Hatch was adapted from Hatch's 1935 comic novel 1101 Park Avenue, with uncredited improvisation added by director LaCava. My Man Godfrey stars William Powell and Carole Lombard, with Alice Brady, Gail Patrick, Gene Dixon, Eugene Paulette, Alan Mowbray, and Misha Auer. During the depths of the Great Depression, Godfrey Smith, known as Duke by his friends, lives with many other homeless men in a New York City dump under the Queensboro Bridge spanning the East River. One evening, their little community is disrupted by the sudden arrival of two Park Avenue brats in evening gowns, Cornelia and Irene Bullock. They are involved in a scavenger hunt along with other members of the city's wealthy elite and are in search of some victim of the Depression, a forgotten man, as one of the items on their list. The older sister, Cordelia, offers Godfrey $5 to return with her to the Waldorf Ritz Hotel as her winning find in the hunt. Godfrey refuses and pushes her into a pile of ashes, much to Irene's delight. Irene apologizes to Godfrey and regrets participating in such a thoughtless and inhumane game. Godfrey, for his part, finds her charming and agrees to return with her to the hotel where the folks known as the cream of New York society are milling about in a mad frenzy with all sorts of odds and ends. Among them are Irene's father, Alexander Bullock, her mother, Angelica, and Angelica's protege, Carlo, an aspiring musician who lives and eats with the Bullocks. With Godfrey as her forgotten man, Irene wins the scavenger hunt. Once her victory is assured, Godfrey denounces the feckless antics of the other participants and leaves the hotel with Irene close behind. She apologizes to Godfrey once again and decides that he should become her protege so she can help him and guide him into respectability. Her first step is to hire him as the eccentric Bullock family's new butler. Universal Pictures had produced a series of popular horror films in the early 30s, including Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy, and The Invisible Man. But studio executives wanted to make more expensive, quality productions, a risky move in the midst of the Depression. Sutter's Gold, a 1936 Western spectacle, failed, and the studio's next big picture, Showboat, was delayed, sending the studio into receivership. My Man Godfrey was the first film to be released under Universal's new production chief, Charles P. Rogers. Rogers bought the film rights to Eric Hatch's 1101 Park Avenue, published in 1935, calling it a surefire, laugh-getting novel. He hired Hatch to work with veteran comic screenwriter Maury Riskind to adapt the story for the big screen. Riskind had already proven himself adept at writing farcical comedies about eccentric characters with his screenplays for three Marx Brothers movies: The Coconuts in 1929, Animal Crackers in 1930, and A Night at the Opera in 1935. To direct My Man Godfrey, Rogers chose Gregory LaCava, proclaiming him the best comedy director in Hollywood. Universal executives originally wanted Constance Bennett, then the highest paid actress in Hollywood, to play Irene Bullock. Director LaCava agreed to Bennett on the condition that Universal would arrange to borrow William Powell from MGM to play Godfrey. But Powell insisted the only choice to portray Irene was Carole Lombard, to whom he had been briefly married a few years earlier. Pamela Hutchinson, film critic for The Guardian, noted in a retrospective in 2020, their divorce had been as amicable as their marriage, which was undone by the 16-year age difference and then Lombard's introduction to Clark Gable, who would become the great love of her short life. But the connection between Powell and Lombard was still palpable and greatly enhanced their performances in the film. The director of My Man Godfrey, Gregory LaCava, got his start in motion pictures in 1915, working as an animator for a series of studios. He then began directing two reel silent comedies with stars like B.B. Daniels and W.C. Fields before turning to sound features in the early 30s. LaCava wrote most of the dialogue in the screenplay for My Man Godfrey, and also encouraged the actors to improvise while shooting. Carole Lombard later said fans of the film should credit 75% of it to Gregory LaCava, who directed it, wrote all the dialogue, and literally gave birth to it. Her ad-libs and those of co-star William Powell ran to four-letter words and were mostly too blue to be included in the final film. Powell and LaCava had some initial disagreement about Powell's character, with the director complaining, "You haven't found Godfrey yet." The two decided to work out their differences one evening over a bottle or two of scotch, and finally agreed on how the role should be played. LaCava came to the set the next day with a headache, but Powell was nowhere to be found. He instead sent a telegram reading, "We may have found Godfrey last night, but we lost Powell. See you tomorrow." One result of LaCava's use of improvisation was that the character of Irene Bullock came to resemble Carole Lombard herself. Critic Pamela Hutchinson wrote in 2020, "Lombard remains the queen of the screwball subgenre, and her Irene, who talks and acts in an outlandish stream of consciousness, is one of her finest creations. Nutty, slap-happy, goofy was how her friend Mitchell Leeson summed up Irene, recalling how Lombard strove to make sense of a woman whose words lacked continuity, were unrelated, and without thought." Lombard herself believed that Irene, beneath the scatterbrained exterior, felt she had missed many opportunities to be a better person. She said, "Irene in Godfrey was, I'd say, the most difficult part I ever played, because Irene was a complicated and, believe it or not, essentially a tragic person." LaCava ran a happy set. According to a 1936 story in the Altoona Tribune, Carole Lombard called William Powell Jr., or Philo, due to his repeated appearances as Detective Philo Vance. In turn, he called Lombard Honey, while LaCava called her Charlie. Misha Auer, who played Carlo, was known during production as Chimp, for reasons obvious to anyone who's watched his most famous scene in the film. Joseph Breen, director of the Production Code Administration, imposed some changes on the screenplay for My Man Godfrey. He insisted that the name of the hotel where the scavenger hunters gathered at the beginning of the film, originally identified as the Waldorf Astoria, be changed to the fictional Waldorf Ritz. The character of Carlo in earlier drafts was repeatedly referred to as Angelica Bullock's gigolo. Breen insisted the word be replaced by protege. He also objected to Alexander Bullock's final resolution to his problems in an earlier version of the screenplay, when he abandoned his family and moved to the South Seas to live with a harem. My Man Godfrey was both a critical and a popular success, one of the most acclaimed comedies of 1936. Variety said, "William Powell and Carole Lombard are pleasantly teamed in this splendidly produced comedy. Story is balmy, but not too much so. Lombard has played screwball dames before, but none so screwy as this one. Her whole family, with the exception of the old man, seem to have been dropped on their respective heads when young. Into this punchy society tribe walks Powell, who straightens out the family as well as himself." An item in the Hollywood Reporter at the film's release said, "My Man Godfrey was the sensation of the week's business of the first-run London theaters. The heavy throng congregating daily for the picture has been causing traffic jams in Leicester Square." My Man Godfrey was the first film to receive Academy Award nominations for writing, directing, and all four acting awards without being nominated for Best Picture. It was also the first film to be nominated in those 6 categories without winning any awards. But no matter. My Man Godfrey is now considered not only a classic screwball comedy of its era, but one of the cleverest, most beautiful, and delightful American film comedies ever made. Please join us again next time for another Saturday Night at the Movies. I'm Glenn Holland. Good night.